Well, now, I'm sitting in my truck here, hugging the heater and charging up some power banks and lights and things, and using the interwebs from the house in order to try to conserve some of my data. It turns out, in the budget that was just brought down by the government of Canada recently, um, digital ID is going to be imposed on certain groups within the country. Old age pensioners, anybody who receives a disability benefit like I do, anyone who is on welfare will also be affected. They're starting out with the most vulnerable in society. Eventually, it will be expanded to everybody. The digital ID is needed by them because they need to amalgamate and incorporate all of our records, all of our identification, and so on, and streamline it into one thing, which will be the digital ID. It's all going to be one thing. Your medical records, your driver's license, your financial records, your criminal record if you have one, your employment record, your educational records, everything will all be, your credit records, it'll all be in the digital ID, all amalgamated. And with that, the government will be able to assign you a social credit score, and the government will be able to put certain penalties against you very easily if you operate outside of whatever it deems right. So if you speak against the government, if you speak against government policies, if you speak against politicians, if you speak against anything like that, that'll be an issue. If you refuse to take a shot or any other medical thing the government orders you to take, that will be an issue. If you disobey mask mandates, vaccine mandates, lockdown mandates, that will be an issue. They'll tie the carbon credits into it too. So if you burn too much fuel, if you burn too much fuel, they'll shut your furnace down or they'll shut your car down. With these new electric cars, they'll be able to do that. If you like I say, if you express an opinion the government doesn't like, if you contribute to a cause the government doesn't believe in, doesn't like, doesn't believe in, if you do anything at all the government doesn't approve of, they'll be able to turn your money off. They'll be able to make it so your car won't run. They'll be able to make it so you're banned from public transport. They can kick you out of your home. They can kick you out of school. They can get you fired from your job. All of it. Just like they do in China. If you want to know what's coming here, look at China. That's what's coming here. They have the social credit score and the digital ID and the digital programmable currency, all of that stuff, the central bank, digital programmable currency. They have it all, and just look how the people there are living. That's our future. Anyway, I won't be accepting it, and I won't be accepting it for a reason of conscience, because I believe it's a step toward the mark of the beast. And I think this is what they do. They lead us there gradually. And so it's like, every journey is taken a step at a time. If I want to get the bull from the barn to the slaughterhouse, I have to do it a step at a time. And that's what you do. You go a step at a time. Each one of these things they do takes us a step closer to a place I personally don't want to be. And I do believe it's a precursor to the mark of the beast, the digital ID. They're even saying you won't be able to work Well, you won't be able to buy or sell. I guess that's the thing if you don't take the digital ID. In England, the Prime Minister there said that you won't be able to work in England if you don't have it. Anyway, it will mean whenever it's implemented that I'll lose my disability benefit. That's going to be a few $100s a month. It's definitely going to hurt me, but it is what it is. There's not really nothing I can do about it. Other than to agree to take the digital ID, which I won't do. So here we are, you see. Also, there's been a study done recently on behalf of the Canadian government about making the MAID program, that's Medical Assistance in Dying, mandatory for certain groups within society, including the homeless and the disabled and so on. They say right now, apparently, assisted suicide is the #1 cause of death in Canada. And our government really wants to get those numbers up, I'll tell you. Even if they have to impose it on people the way they impose it on people in death penalty states in the United States, where if you're convicted of murder, they can impose a lethal injection on you. Whether you want it or not, you'll be getting it if they decide that's how it'll be. They want to do that to people in Canada for being mentally ill, or for being homeless, or just for generally being useless eaters, by their definition. It's quite evil. That's the bottom line. It's quite evil. I won't be participating. I think it's a travesty. I think it's an atrocity. I think that it's every bit as evil as anything that was done in Nazi Germany nearly 100 years ago. They're just getting started, too. You wait and see where it goes. They're just getting started. I was talking to somebody tonight, and they couldn't understand why I wouldn't just go along to get along. And I explained to them about the biblical things, the book of Revelation, and so on. And they said, well, that book was written 2,000 years ago. Society has changed. And of course it has. It's even changed in the last 50 years. So they're right about that. But like I said, God doesn't change. Society changes. Yes, society has been through many incarnations in the last 2,000 years. Society has definitely changed quite a bit. But, like I say, even in the last 50 years, society has changed quite a bit. I know because I've been a witness to it. That's all happened in my lifetime. But, God don't change because God can't be wrong. And that's what I told her. I said, well, look, it's like this. If I have a choice between following the King of the universe, the sovereign creator and King of the universe, and following Mark Carney, I'm going to follow the sovereign creator and King of the universe every time. My money's on him. I think he's the winning horse. I don't think Mark Carney, is somebody I want to follow, really. I mean, if he decides to retire and leave Parliament Hill, I'll be more than happy to go up there and help him pack up his office, and I'll follow him out to his car and carry some boxes for him. Pat him on the back and say, I wish you well, Mark, but please don't come back here. Why don't you go back to England where you were all those years? I hear England's a pretty good place for people like you. That's where you should be probably, Mark. But the thing is, other than following him out of his office with some boxes to put in his car as he leaves, I wouldn't follow that man anywhere. I don't care what they do to me. I'm not going to go along with what's happening now. I'm just not. It's just sickening what they're doing. The more they do, it's unbelievably sickening. Like, there aren't even words. I'm trying to express it, and words are failing me. I'm saying a lot of stuff. I'm doing what a politician does. I'm talking, but not really saying much of anything. And that's because words fail me. The level of evil that I'm seeing now is just right off the charts. And, look, I'm a man who has seen evil. I know all about evil. I've seen it. I've lived it. I have much firsthand experience of it. And so, if I'm at a loss for words, if I'm dumbfounded by the sheer scale of it, that's a pretty good indication of how bad it actually is. Because, like I say, I've seen things that would give the average person nightmares, and I'm not kidding when I say that. I actually have. There are things that have happened in my life and that I've experienced that I don't talk about because people can't handle hearing about it. And yet I lived it. So if I'm sitting here telling you the evil now is so far off the charts, I don't even know if there are words. It may be that the English language is just insufficient to describe the level of evil we're experiencing right now. Anyway, like I say, I have a great deal of respect for this person that I spoke to tonight. Don't get me wrong. I have a great deal of love for this person and a great deal of respect for them. And so this isn't me doxing anybody. And I'm just saying that I did have this conversation tonight. And it really, and basically what I ended up saying to her is, well, she said, I don't see the problem. And I said, well, you don't believe what I believe. So really you wouldn't. I wouldn't expect you to, But even if you don't see the problem from a spiritual point of view, if you look what they're doing in China, and you look into that, do you really want that here? It's pretty awful, I mean, people over there are not free to speak their minds. People over there have to just be fearful all the time of losing social credit points because you could lose your apartment, you could lose your job, you could get kicked out of school, you could be banned from riding on public transportation, your money could be turned off, all of that stuff. With digital programmable currency, too, the ability to save money will no longer be a thing. You won't be able to save money anymore. Well, as long as you got cash, you can save money. You see, as long as cash is negotiable currency, you can save money. I was talking to my friend who runs the garage last week, this past week when I was there. Well, the week before, actually, when I was there, I was talking to her. And she told me that the bank charges them a lot of money to take cash. Like, if a customer like me comes in and pays in cash, the bank charges them a lot of money to take that cash. See, the bank doesn't want it. And so she said, really, we can't go back. We have to do all the electronic transactions and stuff. We can't go back. And I said, well, actually, we could go back. The system isn't going to allow it, that's all. But we could, because we use cash for a long time. For thousands of years, we lived in a cash society. Well, not us personally, because obviously we weren't around for 1,000 years, but you know what I mean. Mankind, collectively. For most of my life, it was a cash society. Debit cards started to be a thing that I recall, at least back in the late 1980s. So I was already in my late teens or early 20s before I ever saw a debit card. Credit cards, of course, have been around for a long time. They've been around at least since the 1940s, maybe even before then. But they weren't the main way people spent money. Most people spent money as cash. I tell a story in this video, on this channel, on a video, about something that happened when I was a young man, and it's kind of comical looking back on it now. But I had a female friend. She was a platonic friend. Nothing ever happened between us of an intimate nature, but anyway, she was pretty and so on, and if she had wanted to try it out, I wouldn't have objected, really. But what happened anyway was I brought her with me from Perth to Smiths Falls. I had some business in Smiths Falls, and I brought her with me for the ride. And we were going past a motel, and she says, "Turn in here." Well, of course, I was a young man, and of course, you know where my mind went automatically. The girl wants me to take her to a motel. This can only mean one thing. So you're darn right I turned in there. You know, I cranked that big old steering wheel around on that old car, and I wheeled right into the parking lot there. And I noticed there was a bunch of trucks from Ontario Hydro in the yard, but that wasn't unusual. You know, traveling work crews that do brush cutting around lines and whatnot often stay in motels. This was a flea bag motel. This was the kind of a place where you could easily rent a room for an hour, you know. So I figured, okay, we're going to the no-tell motel here is what we're doing. The place was actually called the Lockview Motel. That's what it was called, the Lockview Motel. But anyway, it's long gone now. And in fact, when we showed up there, it was condemned. That's part of the story. Turns out her mother was squatting in the manager's residence, and that's why she wanted to stop to see her mother. And there was a drinking party going on in there, and with all the hydro guys. And her mother was an old lady. Her mother had had like 30 kids or something like that, and she was about 60 years old then. She had no teeth. She was a bad alcoholic. And she was sitting there, and she had that laugh. And she'd slap the table, put her fist down on the table, and she'd say to the hydro guys that were in there, they were an awful rough-looking bunch, too. She'd say, "You're a bunch of effing sluts." You know, that's what all of you, you're a bunch of effing sluts. That's what she'd say. Anyway, we were there for about an hour, and I finally said to my friend, "I think I've had enough. Do you think maybe we could leave?" And she said, "Yeah, I've had enough too," and we left. So it didn't turn out the way I had hoped it would. But the thing is, when we came into the motel, you know, there was the front desk there, and then behind the desk there was a door that said private. That went into the manager's residence. I didn't know what was going on. I actually literally thought that she wanted to get a room and that we were going to, you know. So I had no idea what was really going on at that point. Anyway, she goes right around the desk and she opens up the door and she's going into the room, into the manager's residence. And my first thought was, oh my God, she's going to get herself shot. Because in those days, motel managers carried firearms. And the reason for that was motels were a great target of robbers. And the reason for that is we were living in a cash society. Everybody paid for their rooms in cash. So motels were known to have a lot of cash on hand, and robbers used to target motels. Now a motel wouldn't be a profitable place to rob at all because everybody's paying with cards now. There wouldn't be more than probably $30 in the office, just a little bit of money, you know, for incidentals or something. But back in those days, you know, everybody paid in cash. It was a cash society. And, you know, a motel manager would shoot you to death if you just did something like that, you know, had the nerve to go right back into their private residence like that, to storm in there like that. They'd shoot you to death because they'd think you were there to rob them. So my first thought was, I panicked, like, oh my God, she's going to get herself killed. And of course, I followed her because I was young and stupid. You know, I was following the tail, basically. And I was saying, like, don't do, and I was loudly saying, you know, we're not here to rob the place. My friend here just doesn't seem to understand how things work, and she's now come into your residence, but we're not here to rob you. Please don't shoot us. as we're going down the hall into the, there was like a long hallway on the other side of the door that opened up into the sitting room and it was like a kitchen sitting room area of the manager's residence. Anyway, her mother was squatting in there. That's what it was. The place was condemned and her mother was squatting in there. But anyway, yeah. But like I say, there's a story, though, that illustrates how we really were in a cash society back then. Not anymore. I mean, now you never hear of a motel getting robbed. When I was young, that was not an uncommon thing at all for a motel to be robbed, because we were in a cash society. So, I mean, basically, around that same time, I tried to read the book of Revelation, and it made no sense to me. Made absolutely no sense to me. And I gave up because I couldn't make head nor tail out of it. Now it makes a lot of sense. Now I'm seeing it and saying, oh yeah, all right, I get it. Yeah, I know. Now it makes sense. Because the technology is now in place to do all that stuff. To monitor us and to prevent us from being able to buy and sell if we didn't have cash and so on, And that's even what I said to that lady tonight. She said about it being 2,000 years ago. And I said, yes, and 2,000 years ago, that would seem like it was written by a madman. It wouldn't make any sense at all to the people back then. And she agreed. Of course, she used that as evidence that it was not to be believed. But I said, but now it does make sense. And I said, even 40 years ago, it didn't make sense. I told her that. I said, I tried to read it 40 years ago. I couldn't make head nor tail out of it. But I said, now it makes sense. I said, it didn't make sense back then because we weren't anywhere near to being able to do all that. The technology wasn't there yet. We were living in a cash society, Now the technology is in place. And it does make sense. I mean, if God, if the book wasn't written by God or inspired by God, basically, how did these people back 2,000 years ago, how did they know about things that are being talked about, that are happening now? How did they know that it would be possible someday to actually cut people's ability to buy and sell off? How did they know that? If they were just liars or delusional people or whatever, how did they know that? And they weren't inspired by God, but were just writing a story. How did they know that? Who would even think of that back then? And, why would they write that and make them look stupid? People would read that and say, really? Yeah, as if that's going to happen. What's wrong with you? Writing all this crap, as if any of that's ever going to happen. That's what people would have said back then, but yet they wrote it anyway. Now, my belief is they wrote it because God told them to, because God knew what was going to happen. So God said, just write it down. Whether it makes any sense to you or not, write it down, because this is what's going to happen. That's my belief anyway about it. But anyway, bottom line is I can't in good conscience accept the digital ID. I don't believe the digital ID is the mark of the beast, because from what I understand, there's a bunch of other things have to happen, including that the Antichrist has to be fully seated in power before the mark of the beast is revealed. But I do believe that the digital ID is a step in that direction, and if you take one step, then it makes it easier to take the next step, and so on. And you can be gradually led to accepting the mark of the beast. That's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to do that. But it is going to mean that there's going to be some really bad hardship coming my way, that's all. Anyway, it is what it is. I've lived through hardship before. Whatever's supposed to happen will happen. I'm going to have to get more into prayer and But I have to lean on God and trust God more than I do now. And then whatever happens will be His will. And therefore, whatever happens will be right. And that's it. We'll talk to you later.